Good evening. I'm going to call to order the, what day today is today? The February 27th Planning Commission meeting of the City of Half Moon Bay. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. And with that, roll call.
Yes. Commissioner DeMond.
Here.
Commissioner Benjamin. He's on his way. Commissioner Evans.
Here.
Commissioner Holt.
Here.
And Chair Hernandez is absent this evening. So we...
Very good. So with that, we're moving on to the approval of minutes. Let it be noted that Commissioner Benjamin has arrived.
Yes.
We have 2 minutes that we don't have a quorum to approve either of them on, so we will be postponing those for the next meeting. Okay?
Yes, that's correct.
And similarly with the chair, vice chair election, since Chair Hernandez is not here, we've opted to wait until we have a full planning commission. So with that, we can move into public comment. Do we have any speakers of the public who wish to speak on items not on the agenda?
No, we don't.
Okay, very good. So moving to our first item here, pass it over to Jill.
Good evening. Vice Chair Holt, thank you for chairing for us tonight, members of the Planning Commission and public. I'm really pleased to have this presentation this evening from Peggy Jensen, our Deputy County Manager from San Mateo County. Peggy has been a leader with the Home for All effort, and she'll tell you a bit about that. And San Mateo County as a whole and our individual neighboring cities have been working on their accessory dwelling unit ordinance updates, as are we, which I've let you know about. So this, consider this to be an introduction. You're going to hear about state law as well as what county jurisdictions have been doing. You will hear about some standards that are different than what we have, and that is correct, and don't be surprised. At the study session in a couple of weeks, we will review those in quite a bit of detail from a Half Moon Bay perspective. So this is hoping to just warm the topic up. And with that, I'll turn this over to Peggy.
Thank you very much, Jill. It's my pleasure to be here tonight in Half Moon Bay and share a little bit of the work that we've been doing at the county with our Home for All initiative, and specifically talk about some of the information we've been sharing with people like Jill and other folks throughout the county around second units. So a little bit about Home for All. Home for All is an initiative that grew out of the Jobs Housing Gap Task Force that was established about 3 years ago by Supervisor Groom, and then was led, she turned it over to Supervisor Horsley, your supervisor, who co-led the initiative with Supervisor Slocum. The Jobs Housing Task Force included about 54 people from all different walks of life in San Mateo County, ranging from a representative from every city. I think it was Councilwoman Marina Frazier was a participant in that group. We had members from the business community, members from nonprofit community, folks that were advocates, people that were representing developers, both nonprofit and for-profit, variety of people who came together to talk about what is the problem that we're facing with housing in San Mateo County, and what are the things that can be done. There were essentially 3 areas that the group focused on. The first was the fact that there was a need for more money for affordable housing projects. And out of that task force and the Home for All initiative, the extension of the county sales tax, Measure K, grew. So what has happened since Measure K passed is the Board of Supervisors have dedicated about $20 million a year toward the funding of affordable housing projects in the county. The second area that the group talked about was how do we expand the discussion around housing in communities? How do we get more people involved? And we have a variety of projects that are working on that specific topic. And the third area was, how do we get more land? How do we look at land that might not ordinarily be thought of as available for housing? How do we use that to create more housing in San Mateo County? And it was from looking at the land option and trying to look creatively at land that our whole second unit initiative group came forward. So Home for All is working in a variety of areas, but primarily is focused on land, funding for affordable housing, and community engagement. And it is an ongoing group. We have multiple work groups. We continue to meet, and we are very fortunate to have the support of all the board. So with that, I'd like to turn to the second units, unless you have any questions on Home for All. No? Okay. So what are second units? Second units go by a variety of names. You might hear people talk about granny flats. You might hear them called backyard cottages. They're often called ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, and sometimes they're converted garages, so sometimes they're called garage units, but they all essentially mean the same thing. And in California, the way a second unit is defined is that it must share a lot with a single-family home. It may be attached to that home, or it may be standalone, a separate building, as this little cottage is in the backyard. And it must have a kitchen, a bathroom, and a sleeping area. Now, there's another set of second units called junior second units that are actually located within a house. The owner of the property, the owner of the initial home, the primary residence must live in that home. And there's a maximum square footage of 550 square feet for a junior second unit. It must have a separate entrance from the main house, and it must have an efficiency kitchen, which means it has to have a sink, some type of cooking appliance, a counter space, and some storage in the cooking area. And finally, it can share a bath with the rest of the house. So two types of units, standalone units and or attached to the house that are separate, or these junior units that are part of an existing house. So what are the benefits of second units? Why would somebody possibly consider adding a second unit to their home or creating one inside their home? Well, first of all, they create affordable housing. They're a way to create housing that's small scale, that has a small carbon footprint, if you will, and it's an opportunity to provide housing for folks that might have difficulty, quite honestly, finding housing in our current housing market. I mentioned the carbon footprint. They're environmentally friendly in the sense that small houses take up less energy, require less energy to operate. They take up less footprint. So they're a very environmentally friendly option. They're also a housing choice for multiple populations. And I think it's one of the interesting things we learned after talking to a variety of people who have built second units is they can evolve. The use of the second unit can evolve as the family ages. For example, a family that has a student that's possibly just graduated from college, is coming back and starting out their professional career, second unit could be a great place for them to live. It could be a place where an au pair might live. It could be a place where when you buy your first home, you might rent that out, that second unit out, to help cover your mortgage payments. And for folks that are getting on in age, we've seen it be both a place where a HEC caretaker has lived, and it's also been a place where folks have downsized and then given the primary residence to their family. So it's a solution for people at many points in their life. And I also pointed out it is for many people additional income that's quite helpful. So what's the potential in Half Moon Bay for second units? We've looked countywide, and there's significant potential for second units throughout San Mateo County. But according to the census, Half Moon Bay has about 3,000 single-family homes. And that's what you have to start with to have a second unit. The other thing that the folks who are interested in second units talk about is it's helpful if people have equity in their home, which means that they can, if they want to build a second unit, they can draw against that equity to do the construction of the unit. Many people, according to the census, have been long-term homeowners, so they've probably developed a significant amount of equity in Half Moon Bay. And they also have personal interest. As I mentioned, people have a desire to have a second unit for a variety of reasons. And my assumption is there are probably a number of people in Half Moon Bay who have one or maybe multiple reasons to consider a second unit. So when you add those things together, you get the second unit potential for a community. So here's some just examples of second units, backyard cottages. They're pictures from all over the country. One of the areas that actually has some of the largest numbers of second units and the most aggressive promotion of second units is Portland, Oregon. Another place that actually has more second units than just about any place else is Vancouver, Washington. Every single family housing permit in Vancouver is allowed to include a second unit. And they've got about 35% of the single family homes in Vancouver have second units. So when we started looking into second units as an option for addressing housing issues in San Mateo County, we contracted with a firm called Barrett and Driscoll, and they're the folks that run the 21 Elements program in San Mateo County that provide assistance countywide for all the planning departments around their housing elements. And Barrett and Driscoll brought together three different focus groups. They brought together a group of people who had built second units. They brought together a group of folks who were interested in building a second unit, and they also had a focus group with builders and architects who worked on second units. And what they heard from the folks that were interested in building units, who thought about it or maybe pursued it slightly, and the folks that had actually built a second unit, there were some issues and concerns about the whole process. And what we tried to do with our work on second units is try and address them. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. In terms of the owner focus groups, they emphasize that a property owner isn't a housing developer. They're not familiar with the development process like a regular developer would be. They're not familiar with the rules and regulations. They're unfamiliar with the planning permit process, the inspection process. It was something foreign to them, and it was more time consuming because they weren't familiar with the process. They also had concerns about fees and permits. Because they weren't familiar with the process, they didn't understand the types of fees and permits that were required. There was also some questions and concerns about parking requirements. And finally, folks who were looking at this as an income property often mentioned that they really never had landlord experience. They didn't know how to go about being a property owner and renting out a property to someone. So those were the concerns that folks had. And what's happened in the last, I think it was in 2016, two pieces of legislation were adopted in Sacramento that addressed some of the concerns that were raised by the folks in our focus groups. SB 1069 did a number of things related to second units. The legislation eliminated water and sewer hookup fees for second units, assuming that the primary residents had already paid those fees for that hookup. They changed the parking requirements, so additional parking is not required if the second unit is located within a half mile of public transit. And for junior second units, those ones I talked about that are inside an existing home, no additional parking is required. Another thing they changed is that they said sprinklers are not required in second unit if, in fact, sprinklers were not required when the primary residence was built. And then finally, SB 1069 says that the regulations or the requirements around second units in this piece of legislation supersede all local second unit regulations. And so you can correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but my understanding is if a community does not have any second unit regulations, the state regulations became the law in that community. If the community has regulations, they can make them more stringent than SB 1069, but they can't be more lenient. The second piece of state legislation related to second units was AB 2299, and that became effective January 1, 2017, a little over a year ago. And what that did was it established a ministerial approval process for all second units that meet very specific criteria. And my understanding of ministerial approval means over the counter. If you meet criteria on a specific checklist, that means that you get your approval for your second unit. There's no design review, there's no going into the planning commission. It's a simple over-the-counter process. But to have that ministerial process, that over-the-counter approval, the unit must not be for sale, but it may be rented. It must be in a single-family zone. It cannot be greater than 50% of the floor area of the primary residence, and the total square footage cannot exceed 1,200 square feet maximum, and no setbacks are required if in fact the conversion is of a garage. So a garage may be closer than what normal setbacks would be from the property lines. If you're converting a garage to a second unit, there are no setback requirements. So what's happened in San Mateo County since the passage of these two pieces of legislation? Well, most cities and towns have adopted second unit ordinances. I checked with my colleagues at Baird and Driscoll, and they said there are only 3 cities in San Mateo County that have not adopted a second unit ordinance. There are about 4 or 5 that are in the process of updating them, but everybody else has adopted new ordinances in the county. The county adopted our second unit ordinance, our updated second unit ordinance, back in January of 2017, and and that is for the area outside the coastal zone. Inside the coastal zone, which obviously applies to most of Half Moon Bay, or maybe all of Half Moon Bay, all of Half Moon Bay, the Coastal Commission certified our second unit regulations in September of 17. So our regulations now apply throughout the county. So finally, I'd like to share with you some of the tools that our Home for All initiative has developed to promote and share information with folks about second units. And the work that we focused on was based upon what those focus group people told us that they'd like to, that would be helpful to them. The county has established an online second unit center. That center includes information, actually a number of stories about people who have developed second units on their own, what prompted them to do that, floor plans, just essentially to provide people with some ideas about what they might consider. It also includes a high-level overview of the 10 steps someone who's considering developing a second unit needs to take, starting from when you first have an idea through final sign-off through the construction process. In addition, the website includes an online calculator. Essentially, it's an interactive tool that allows people to look at, consider what kind of second unit they might like to build in terms of square footage and design type and sense of whether it's a high-end model or a moderate-end model or a lower-end model. And it allows you to calculate cost estimates for the second unit. And then it also provides a calculation based upon current rents by city of what income might be. So it's essentially a cost-benefit calculator for people who are interested in providing building a second unit. On your table in front of you is one of the other tools that we developed. It's called our Second Unit Inspiration Book. All the information in this book is also included on our website, and if you look at the back of the book, you will see the website address is secondunitcenter.smc.org. But our inspiration book includes 5 stories of San Mateo County residents who decided to build a second unit. And as I mentioned before, there are a variety of people that choose to do this. One story is about a woman in Pacifica who built a second unit in the backyard of her daughter's home. A couple of the units were developed here on the coast side. I don't think any in Half Moon Bay, but I think they were developed in the unincorporated area. One was about two parents who have a son who's developmentally disabled, and they were trying to figure out how they could take care of him in the future. So they added a second unit to their home up here on the coast side. They're living in the second unit, and the family that takes care of their son is living in their primary residence. And that second unit will ultimately provide long-term income for the son's care over time. So I highly recommend that you look at our idea book. In addition to those 5 stories, in the back, it includes a number of different floor plans of different second units that have been developed throughout the county and throughout the state. And finally, our consultants are also in the process of building, actually it's still under construction, our second unit workbook. This is the first of 5 chapters that will be in the workbook. It's essentially a step-by-step how-to book to build a second unit or develop a second unit here in San Mateo County. We expect that it will be completed in late April, and we will do final edits in early May, and we will be distributing to all the cities and towns, libraries that are interested in having copies probably in mid-May. So what's next? I mentioned the second unit workbook, the target release. A couple of other things that we're working on. We have entered into an agreement with the Silicon Valley Talent Partnership, which is a group, a volunteer group, or it's a nonprofit group that is associated with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation that connects public sector projects with private sector expertise. And we have entered into an agreement with Adobe Systems, marketing experts from Adobe Systems, that are developing a marketing plan for our second unit work. We will be hearing back from them. Their final report is due back to us on March 30th. So that concludes my presentation on second units. Again, that's our website, secondunitssmc.com. And if you want to check out, follow us on Twitter, we are at Home for All SMC also. So thank you very much. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Very good. With that, thank you very much. Questions?
Yeah, just as from Jill, you say this is going to be coming to us on our plate when, in terms of all this?
We are currently working on a study session for your very next meeting on March 13th.
Okay, and I presume there'll be some reading material in terms of how these two AB rules, 1069 and 2299, may or may not apply to Half Moon Bay, right?
We are planning to present that in a real direct manner, both in your staff report as well as in the presentation. And remember, again, it's a study session. We're not going to bring you an ordinance. We will have some draft ordinance language sections because we want to suggest some ways that we could amend our ordinance to conform to state law and get your feedback about that. We also intend to focus on areas where we have real important policy questions, and there is some requirement about the state law that can be superseded really by coastal zones. So there's a few areas where we think they're especially sensitive, and so we're going to hone in on that so that it's more sort of scaled to what works in Half Moon Bay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. Thank you for that presentation. I had lots of questions, but since this isn't a detailed, let me just pick up a couple of themes and see if I can get a sense of where we might be headed with our presentation coming up next month. You mentioned that the second unit ordinance had been certified by the Coastal Commission, which means that it's now part of the county's local coastal program, I gather. It did not exempt development from coastal development permits. Is that correct?
I will double check how that works, but this is intended to be non-discretionary permitting.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Then with the locus of the conversation was about areas that are single-family units. If someone develops a duplex in an area that could be either single-family or a duplex, but it's in an area that is zoned for single-family dwellings, do they have the flexibility to add a third unit, say a junior unit or something within that area of the county?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the detail on the
Yeah.
county's code with that, but we can, I'll pitch these over. The county planner who worked on this has done an exceptionally good job. So any questions that you have tonight, or if you want to pitch them
Yeah,
over
and I
over
can
the
ju-
next week, I can find out.
And
Yeah.
I'll totally do that.
Yeah.
These are not gotchas. I really appreciate what's going on here. I'm
Okay.
just trying to get a sense of the flow of the dialogue.
Okay.
The water and sewer permit exemptions that have taken place, I understand that that was a barrier to implementing them. On the other hand, adding people to a home increases the consumption of water, it increases the consumption of sewer. Similarly, if it involves children, they go to school, there's potential for other urban services, fire, water, things like that. Is there a provision in the county's tax code to adapt to that, or does the rest of the county that doesn't develop ADUs sort of absorb the total cost of providing the additional services that statistically would be necessitated by those?
So we've been trying to work very closely with the county assessor to find out what to do some calculations, and because the first thing people ask is what are the property tax impacts of adding a second unit. We're still working on that. We don't have those details. But because of the state legislation, there are limitations on the kinds of fees, as I mentioned. I think the only way that, but if but the value of the property would increase if there was a second unit added. So that increased value would then be distributed to all the agencies that receive taxes from that property, the school district, the water district, the city.
Yeah, I mean, the goal here again is, I have this list, circulation
Right.
related, what constitutes a transit stop, is that a BART stop or is that a bus stop that's served once a day by a bus? So lots of those kind of questions to ask, but for now I'll just say very stimulating presentation. You've given us something to think about, and I appreciate it and the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Evans?
Thank you for the presentation. I was invited to and attended a few weeks ago the workshop that the county put on for a varied community, and I was there with 2 of our city council members. And I was just really impressed with the forward-thinking work the county is doing about, for example, the job versus housing crisis. A staggering statistic that 244,000 people drive into San Mateo County every day. I was just, and so the amount of data information that was given was just wonderful, and I look forward to dialoguing and sharing that when we have our next workshop. And thank you very much for the county's effort in how they're organizing that.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Commissioner Evans sort of touched on what I said. So looking through the staff report here, I see, one of the defined missions to address the county's 26-to-1 jobs housing gap. So that means that in San Mateo County, there's 26 jobs for every housing unit.
Yes, that was the ratio in 2014. Jobs have not been increasing as quickly as they did between 2010 and 2014. So and we've added a little bit more housing, but that 26-to-1 was about 65,000 jobs and about 1,500 housing units. Our ratio is now down to about 16-to-1. There have been a few more housing units established or developed, but jobs have not been increasing quite as quickly.
Great, and so appreciated the overview of the state legislation. You stated that local governments can create local rules that are, I guess, whether they're more stringent or more. So for, I guess, perhaps just tossing out an example here, the state legislation that requires to be within a half-mile of transit. If we were looking at, say, some of the bus stops here in Half Moon Bay as being a transit facility, and would there be potential for Half Moon Bay to sort of extend that beyond the half-mile stretch, just given that a lot of our neighborhoods that would be available for this type of accessory dwelling unit would be outside of that half-mile?
That will be a policy question for you. We are going to pose our recommendation, and then we're expecting some feedback.
So the state law still permits us to sort of consider
Yes.
that sort of thing. Okay, great. Well, that's all the questions from me. As we go up to public comment, are there any questions from the public? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, we've had these at City Hall. By the way, we have had these at City Hall out front in our alcove, and they disappear. So people are taking them. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you. Moving on to our next item, item 1B, study session. Study session for a single-family residence at 390 Myrtle Street.
So to introduce, I just want to take a minute to introduce the next 2 items, and then Scott will go through them one at a time. We have 2 applications for really fairly challenging infill sites. They both happen to be corner lots. One of them you've seen previously, that'll be the Poplar duplex that we'll see next. This single-family lot on Myrtle Street, we discovered is definitively a legal lot, and so that was a very important part of the research here. And so the context for this is how to do infill like this on challenging sites, whether they're substandard or have other limitations, such that it is supportive of our housing element and supportive of our neighborhood context, and all the other things that you usually would consider as planning commissioners with respect to environmental concerns or drainage or access, et cetera. We certainly will be bringing those to you. We don't consider the plans to be complete for either project. The intent is that this is a study session, and we're really eager to get your feedback, because they are not, this is not the typical house that you see. So with that, we'll let Scott get going, and I know that applicants are here for both of these items, and looks like we've got some neighbors maybe too, which is great. So there'll be time for people to speak about it.
Thanks, Joe. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. As Jill mentioned, this is a unique site. This slide shows an aerial photo with, as you can see, the narrowness of the lot, and it's a fairly long corner lot on the corner of Myrtle and Second. The site currently has no curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and is undeveloped. There's some fencing, and the applicant has installed story poles for viewing, and as Jill mentioned, we spent quite a bit of time going through the chain of title that was submitted, and concluded that it is a legal lot. So with that, here's the site plan that's been drawn up thus far, and notice that it does allow for 2 parking spaces in the back. My clicker just died. Oh, here we go. Right in the back here, included with the project would be the installation of curb, gutter, and sidewalk and driveway apron along the entire frontage. Here, there is a pedestrian path that would link the new sidewalk to a front porch. And here's the floor plan that includes a 2-bath and 2-bedroom and a small loft that's roughly 5 feet in height. So, an area, granted it is a fairly, a modestly sized house, roughly 1,100 square feet. So this would provide additional storage, for, the modestly sized house. Here's the front elevation that would face Myrtle, and notice that they have included, several, varying roof planes and, architectural features to break up the elevation. And it does conform to our DLA plan requirements. So this would be the back elevation that faces the neighbor along Second. And, sort of the long nature of the lot, this would face Second. And notice the shed dormer here that provides some windows for the loft area, as well as a bay window here. This would face west. The windows have been minimized to reduce any privacy impact on the adjacent neighbor. And that's about all I have on this one. We encourage the Planning Commission to take public comment. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and interested to hear your design feedback on this unique project. So.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Scott. I do have one public comment, so let's go ahead and take that now before we bring it back to the commission. James Gillart.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I forgot to mention the applicant is here. If
Oh, great.
if you'd like to give him an opportunity to speak as well.
Sure. Perhaps we could have the applicant speak first. Would that be all right? Great. Thank you very much.
So I'm not going to repeat what Scott has already gone through. I just want to add a few comments to the project. This was a difficult build. It's 21-foot wide lot. It was a real challenge. It was a very collaborative approach with city staff, specifically Scott. He went out of his way to help us to get where we are today. And I really feel that the project is appropriate for the lot site as well as the neighborhood. And at that, with that, I just want to answer any questions you may have on it.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate you being here and available for questions. So with that, we can open it up to public comment. Sorry, could you make sure your microphone's turned on there, or at least speak closer into it, if it is?
Okay. Is it on now? Okay. Again, my name is James Goulart, live at 380 Myrtle Street, the property just west of that lot that's being discussed. My family and I moved in there 6 years ago. When we moved in there, that lot was a separate lot and had at one time been part of the lot. I guess there was a mutual agreement between the owners, but then they separated, and that's how we moved in as a separate piece of property. When we moved in, we saw that the value to our property, or looked into the value of the property, and then discussed it with the city and found that it was non-conforming, that it would not be buildable upon, that it did not have access to utilities, and therefore had no value to anybody else but to our property. The property just to the south of us, which shares a public access easement because of the sewer that goes between the properties, wouldn't be able to really use that property. So the uniqueness of that situation caused us to look at the county to assess it, and the county's assessment 6 years ago was the property was worth $8,000 due to it not being able to be built upon. We talked to the city about if we purchased it, that we would have to join those properties and become a single lot, and that when we did that, our offsets or insets from the street would become larger, and therefore our footprint would only increase by 5 feet. We could have gone up, but that was never in our plans. So we never looked into it further. And then we come to find that the property was sold within the last year, and that these plans were made for a home to be built on this property. We were, to say the least, upset. So, emotions aside, there are some issues here. To quote, it's not a typical house you see, okay? It's also been called unique. That is the definition of what the Planning Commission looks at when you're putting in a home in the neighborhood. It does not fit the neighborhood. The second story on this small lot is non-conforming by definition. That's why they're coming to you to get through this process, to go over these laws that have been put in place to make sure neighborhoods stay in some sort of fashion controlled, so that everybody can have enjoyment of their property. Just this morning, I was noticing by looking at the story poles, which have only been up for a week, that my home did not receive sunlight until approximately 9 in the morning on the coldest days of the year, where the warmth of the home in the morning is the most important time when you're getting your family out. So there's going to be an economic impact on me. So I want to point out to the Planning Commission, without taking too much more of your time, because this is a study session, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the hard work that you've gotten into and the property owners. But it doesn't fit in the neighborhood. We're also going to be setting a precedent for non-conforming homes on lots. There are empty lots in the Arletta Park area that if this home goes in, Does that give other people the ideas and/or purpose to try and put in these small non-conforming homes into bigger lots and therefore turning this into a high-density housing area? Of course, that's the job of the city and the planning commission to not let happen, but when you set a precedence, then it becomes harder to stop that from happening. Please take these items into consideration when you're discussing these things. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That's the only speaker card I have on this item. Are there any other speakers wishing to speak? Feel free. Please just make sure you announce your name into the microphone. And then when you're complete, if you could fill out a green card and get it over to Bridget.
My name is Jules Sofer, and I live on 536 Poplar Street, and I really came to speak to the next item. But I have an observation on this one which might help the Planning Commission, and that is that we on Poplar were kind of nervous about a corner property which was only, at best, 25 feet wide that was built on. It's about a block from where I live. And it turned out pretty nicely, but cautionary note, and keep this in mind, ours was a one-story. Now, one story, if it were one story, it wouldn't affect the sunlight of the neighbor as much. And so, while this one that I am referring to worked out all right in most of the neighbors' opinions, I think you might want to consider whether you really want 2 stories there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We have one more addition, Mr. McGregor.
Paul McGregor, 484 Poplar. I have a house that is very similar to this one right here, and it's very difficult to actually build on something like this. So my hat's off to Mr. Ralston for trying to make this happen. And realistically, you should probably give him the variance that he needs to make this go through, because Half Moon Bay needs a housing that they don't have right now. And if you put so many restrictions on all these small infill lots and stuff like that, it just makes it very difficult to build something. I live in a 14-foot wide house right now. I'm on the corner of 3rd and Poplar. It was approved many years ago. That would be me, yes. And I like the house. I like living there. I like the community. And eventually I'll move on. I'll move somewhere else. But you know, it's something good for this community. Not everybody needs a big house. They don't have to be 3,000-4,000 square feet. Small houses are good. Duplexes are good. And I agree with what he's designed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public speakers? So with that, we'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. Commissioner DeMond.
Several questions. The size of the lot certainly is an issue. Now, you say this is a legal lot. Can you give any history? When was it ever split off from the lot to the west of it? Was once one lot? I mean, driving by, it seemed like there was a driveway on both the 2nd Street side that kind of goes to the back that perhaps once upon a time. How's the alley rather than a driveway? Okay. But anyway, help me out from a, why where in the past we kind of had a policy to try to combine lots so that they were all legal size. How did this one remain?
Well, thank you for asking that question. And it's, ultimately we did rely on our legal staff to kind of check our work, so to speak, in reviewing and researching the chain of title that was submitted with the application. And the research involves going through every single grant deed and document that's been recorded against the property to verify legality, and comparing to how that squares up with the California Subdivision Map Act. And in this case, going through it, It turns out that the lot was created by separate conveyance before a certain date identified in the Subdivision Map Act, which I believe is in 1970. I don't recall exactly, but it was in 1964 that this one was, this lot was created by separate conveyance. Back then it was possible to subdivide by grant deed as opposed to going through a subdivision process that you're more familiar with today. So that's in a nutshell, that's the what the history is with this lot. To my knowledge, there was no additional driveway or any sort of access across it. There was an alleyway, a city alleyway that the city does have. There is documentation that the alleyway was formerly abandoned by the city, and half of 5 feet on each side of the alleyway was given to the adjacent property owners. So, and thus enlarging the lot by 5 feet. So that was within the change of title as well.
Second question is, what constitutes a second story? When you went through your deal, this was a loft. Is there any living space on the upper story, just from a definition standpoint? Would this be considered a two-story house, or?
As mentioned in the presentation, there is a small loft space, but that would not meet our definition of second story as identified in the building code, which requires a certain height. The loft happens to be 5 feet in height. Therefore, the building is considered a single story, and the maximum allowed height is 20 feet as opposed to the normal 28 feet for two-story. So,
I'd like to just, though, remember that there is additional massing because of the loft, and it is within your discretion to consider that in your design review, especially in the context of the size of the site. Okay.
Very good. Commissioner Benjamin, questions?
So architectural design review is not my wheelhouse, so I'm going to lean heavily on my colleagues, especially Commissioner Evans, and get clarity from them. So I'll be very interested in their thoughts. But I would like to ask about the pitch of the roof relative to the pitch of other roofs in the community. When I visited the site, it looked to me like the angle was rather steep relative to the others. Is that in fact the case?
Yes, I think that would be an accurate statement that the surrounding neighborhood, most of the houses do have a shallower pitch than the roof of the proposed house.
Fair enough.
Now, what drove the angle of the roof that you see this evening is, for one, our daylight plane requirement, and two, the architectural style of the house. So.
Yeah. No, I realize we're not making judgments, but I just wanted to be sure whether I wanted to try to understand whether I was perceiving it correctly. Then a question was, I appreciated the comments on the alley. I posed a question about the alley actually by voicemail to Scott earlier, so I know it's not a surprise, and I appreciated the insight. I gather from your comment that the alley was actually 10 feet wide, and half of the alley was actually given as a gift by the city to the property owners on either side of the alley. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And
that's unbelievable. I'm not even sure that's constitutional.
Now, there is a sewer line that goes along the back of the properties there. So.
Yeah, so that, thank you. I was going to get to that. Just I appreciate the point of information for the public, but please bear with us. We'll get there. So you mentioned that one of the speakers in the public mentioned easements, and I confess not to reading the map in detail at this stage. Can you just remind us in the hearing where the easements are, not just the sewer line, but also the water line, and where the development as proposed sits relative to the actual right-of-way on 2nd Street?
So in regard to the sewer easement, it is within the, it is shown in the title report. We are waiting for a recorded easement for the sewer line. And on other projects, we have added a condition of approval requiring the sewer easement offer before building permit issuance. So that may be a draft condition of approval that may end up on this resolution.
Let me,
So,
okay, so that answer is with respect to a sewer that would actually, a lateral that would serve this property.
not necessarily the lateral, but the actual city main sewer.
Yeah, that was my question, is right now, that neighborhood is served by a sewer line. And I'm trying to understand where that sewer line is.
So
So
right
it's run-
along there. in
So
the
it's
back.
running along the southern edge of the alley, of what was an alley.
Correct.
Okay. What about power? Is the power in this area is overhead utilities, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and the water lines, are they running in the same vicinity as the sewer line, or is the water line
Water line is in the street, so
street meaning Myrtle or street meaning Second?
I believe it's Myrtle.
I
So,
see. Okay, so the bottom line is that we don't think there are any encumbrances other than Second Avenue. There are no encumbrances parallel to Second Avenue on that face of the property other than whatever setbacks we might issue variances for.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Then I think I'd like to hold off on my other questions until I hear from my colleagues, because they're smarter at stuff like this than I am, and I'll probably learn a lot by shutting up. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Evans?
For now, I have just some questions. Just to make sure I'm just reading the information correctly, it was a little hard for me to, on the site plan, I just want to make sure I have what you have identified as the setback. So the setback from Myrtle Street is 25 feet to the porch? And then the setback on the rear property is 17 feet from the original property line, and then 5 feet to the center line of the sewer easement. Is that right? And then on the west side of the property, it's 3 feet plus a couple thousandths of an inch. Yeah. And then the setback from the Second Avenue is 5 feet. Is that, I got that right? It shows on this site plan that the existing walkway that's on the house to the south on Second Avenue is off of the property line. When I went out there and looked at it, it looks like the sidewalk on the house to the south on Second is up against the fence. Is there any actual technical data of where the power pole is and where that existing sidewalk is? Do we have any information about that?
No, just what's on the survey.
I don't have a survey here. I just have a site plan from Sue Taylor.
Give me a moment, I can see if I have the survey. Yeah, we can get back to you on that, so.
Okay, because it was just, I just don't have any way to, you know, factually tell, when I look out there of where the sidewalk is and where, I guess, the city staff is suggesting there's a new curb and gutter, how those kind of line up. And then also, on Myrtle Street, there's houses that are going to the west of this property. What's the front yard setback when those houses were built? I know the city went through a period where they changed these front yard setbacks from 20 to 25 feet.
Correct. A lot of the houses to the west on Myrtle have a 20-foot front yard setback.
Okay. And then it says in our summary sheet here, it said that the leading up to the project submittal, the applicant considered various design options for the site. Just kind of a yes/no question. Were we going to see any of the design options? That's just a yes/no question.
I'm going to answer that question because we didn't bring you the first design option because it was a full 2-story house. And we felt it was too big for the site, and the applicant's design intent with the architectural proposal is completely their proposal. We did not direct any of the detailing in that manner. We simply requested that they come back with a much smaller scale project for the size of the site. So that's why you're not seeing the previous option.
And then one more technical question here. I'm seeing, I'm sorry I don't have a section cut through this to see internally, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand this correctly. When I look at the elevations from the north, I'm trying to figure out this, what you call loft above, and then there's a ladder. It says ladder stairway that goes to this loft, and then it's 140 square feet. So I'm interested in, I'm going to be talking about the California Building Code, not our planning codes. My understanding of the definition of a habitable room is if it's more than 70 square feet. I'm not talking about stories, just habitable spaces. And my understanding is that if there's a habitable room, it has to have a stairway, not a ladder. So I don't know what code section would allow this ladder to this size room. And the definition of rooms with sloped ceilings is anything that's less than 5 feet of a ceiling height, and a sloping ceiling is not habitable. So I kind of measured this, and it looked like this 140 square feet is about the size of that space. So I have some just questions that I think will come up at plan check, not even here. And then also a question about the window sizes on this loft, that if it's a habitable room, then the windows, would they meet egress for an emergency access? So those are questions, not critique of the design at this point.
We appreciate you bringing that up, and it did come up in conversation, and we had our building staff take a look at this. We'll have them take a look again, and just to verify that there isn't any concerns with habitable space, and yeah, and we'll certainly provide a section once this comes back to the Planning Commission for review.
Yeah, and I'm referencing still the 2013 CBC, so I know we're working with 2016 CBC, but it's
as shown on the plans right now, it certainly could not be a bedroom, for example, because it clearly doesn't meet the egress requirements.
But the code talks about habitable space, so so it's just a technical question I have that.
And we'll certainly provide clarification before this comes back to the Planning Commission.
And then on the site plan, it shows the parking to the south, and so I have, and there, it's not So it seems like from the property line to the back of where the parking is about 16 feet, 6 inches, something like that. And so I'm wondering if this was approved as official parking. That's smaller than what a parking space actually is, so that would mean that there would be parking in the public right-of-way that's officially approved.
Just to clarify, the plans have not been approved yet, and
Understand.
you know, they are this. It's certainly a helpful comment, and we'll make for certain that they have at least 19 feet of depth for each of the parking spaces, and have them make that change on the
It would be on the,
site plan. The fortunate thing is they do have the space to allow for
Right,
for 19 feet of depth for each of the parking spaces.
okay,
Um,
those are my questions.
and yeah.
We'll get comments at another, get back on the round of design review things, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So Scott, can you just, for me, run through just what approvals would be necessary on this in terms of variances or anything else along those lines?
Certainly. So, for starters, they would need a coastal development permit, an architectural review for the new house. As designed currently, a parking exception would be required to eliminate the 2 garage parking spaces, or excuse me, the 1 space and 1 uncovered space not in the front yard setback. So essentially the 1 garage space. And then a variance to encroach into the street-facing side setback by 5 feet along there.
Okay, very good, thank you. I think most of my questions were covered by Commissioner Evans.
Just one, 2 more questions. And
Great.
I guess we can, obviously, we're not here to approve or kind of give comments. We're in a study session form. And obviously, this is a very challenging lot, to say the least. I think we'd all agree with that. My limited architectural views, at least what I saw drawing-wise, looked okay, but the question is in context of the neighborhood. I'm just trying to figure out what other options there might be for this lot. For example, could the owner put a double-wide trailer there and live there? Is that an option? I mean, I'm trying to, if it's a legal lot, what options are there for making this lot habitable as opposed to doing nothing at all? I'm just trying to get that through my head. I mean, it's legal, it has value, but if they can't build a home on it, I mean, I'm trying to think of what we as a planning commission can advise or help, assist, and so on. I mean, that's just kind of what my thinking is as far as this project. So I'm just wanting to get some dialogue going on that score.
So your if you could clarify on your question, is it specifically for double wide trailer?
It would, or some mobile home or whatever we call them these days.
So they wouldn't be able to, a mobile home would not be allowed. There are plenty of pre-manufactured products out there that would conform to our design guidelines, and certainly they could pursue an option similar to that. But something that's actually mobile would not be allowed.
So prefab, though, I guess, called what you would of course be an option here too.
Yes, certainly. So there are certainly some quality pre-manufactured products out there that would conform to our design.
I mean, if this is
the tricky thing is the narrowness and the
narrowness
setbacks
a lot, right? So I mean, I'm thinking about prefab homes and things like that on that score. Okay, I'm just trying to get my mind on this, so thank you for those comments.
Additional questions? Commissioner Benjamin?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the insights from my fellow commissioners and helped me formulate some of my follow-up questions. The first one, though, is relating to understanding whether this would be conforming with respect to the footprint ratios, you know, our floor area ratio, or the footprint of the site. It seems like it's occupying a fairly substantial part of the site. What's the standard in this area, and what are we at on this particular proposal for a footprint?
Yeah, so the maximum allowed lot coverage is 50% of the lot size, and they're right at 50%.
I see.
Yes. Mhm.
And that's okay. So we're counting all of the land on the, you know, areas that would be restricted by a sewer easement. The denominator is as big as it can be. I just want to be very clear about that.
We also want to note that the applicant is presenting this as the loft area not being habitable space and is not including the loft square footage
For
in the
FAR.
calculation of the floor area ratio.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
that was a separate question. The first one was footprint, and, you know, you've anticipated the FAR question, so thank you for that. And I appreciate that the analysis looks at what a neighbor would see from different angles as they're looking at it. I'm trying to visualize the effect of this proposal on the neighbor immediately to the west. And I wonder about, you know, what alternatives might be considered to try to reduce impacts. I can see, you know, a loss of light, whether it conforms to our rules or not. It certainly represents a change in their experience of daylight. I don't know much about whether vegetative screening would be, you know, to what extent that would be effective. It wouldn't change the light plane, but it would mean you're looking at vegetation rather than, you know, another wall. And I'm trying to understand of course, we also have fire constraints and flammable materials in such proximity. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have setbacks in properties. So I want to be sure I understand how to balance the trade-off between managing the privacy concerns, for lack of a better term, and the safety concerns. Can you help me a little bit with that, or should I just pose that as an abstract question for thinking?
Well, I think we want to share that here, let's look at that elevation real quick. So this is the west elevation facing the neighbor immediately next door. And I'm not sure if the issue is privacy concern so much in that we would assume there'd be a 6 or 7 foot fence in between, although the house is closer. We're really interested in feedback about any of it, but we're wondering about the massing because of the closeness. And in my take, I'm not sure that the windows are a significant issue or the privacy itself. So anyway, take a look at this. You'll see there's even the high sill window in the back room there. So there's really only 3 windows that are looking over.
Right. Privacy is probably not the right. I appreciate you bringing that back up. But it's more of a concern of what if I were the neighbor looking to the east at this, I'd be looking at a pretty substantial wall without much articulation and not very much daylight, further restricted by the steep and rather tall roof for the dimension. So, you know, again, I'm not trying to, you know, this is a study session, so I want to be clear that I'm not approving or disapproving or saying I would or wouldn't, but that would be a concern aesthetically for me. Yeah, that's the chairman's. You're the public hearing. I don't know whether you closed it. That's your call.
We did close the public hearing.
open it again.
Yeah, we can go ahead and open it towards the end.
You-
Sure. I'm comfortable, yeah, go ahead and answer the question.
So for the views, would be from the kitchen window on my home, which is towards the front, towards the north of the house. Right in past the garage is the kitchen. That has a view, which now has a view of the mountains, which would be completely blocked by this. The bedroom that is next to the kitchen has a sliding glass full door, which again would be completely blocked by the view. And then the next bedroom to the south has a sliding glass room door, which again faces to the east and has views of the mountains over the fence. All three of those would be completely have a blocked view.
And if I can pose a question as long as the speaker is at the
Yes.
line. And if the pitch were a little bit lower, if, let's say, again, this isn't design advice, but if there were not a loft in the site and the thing were pitched a little lower, would those views still be gone because it's so close to your property? With the proviso, of course, that the city does not protect private views. That's not our job.
Yes, and I understand that's not a venue of the planning commission, but it would still block the views.
Thank you.
And do you know, there's a current fence there, the height of that current fence?
It's a 6-foot fence with a 1-foot trellis.
And there's an area of a covered patio, correct, or something over in that area?
Yeah.
Okay, just clarifying.
And then I just wanted to get clarification. I'm not sure if John was sort of referencing this or whether I read something into his comments that weren't actually there. John, was there some concern about adverse possession, that there was some development to the south of this parcel that might have encroached? I'm not sure you were asking about the property line back there and some things at that area.
No, I was just asking questions about what the information is on the drawings.
Okay. So then the other question is, existing development. I noticed that when I visited the site, it looked to me like there were some adjacent property owners that seemed to be using a portion of the parcel. I'm not suggesting adverse possession or not, just wanted to be clear on whether that was an issue associated with this development. So that and the vegetation question, to the extent that something would be developed there, the idea of vegetation that would soften the interface between homes seems like a valued tool for managing impacts. Those are my comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scott, could you put the front of the house back on there that shows the pitch of the roof? So, I mean, obviously it's steep, and there's a window in front. I guess that's part of the storage area or loft kind of thing. I'm not sure what it's called, but I've seen houses that have maybe a 3-part roof, side and then kind of going up shallower that allows drainage. I'm not sure what those are called. John, help me out. Dutch kind of roof on that. And I guess my question is, would that add enough light to make any difference to the house on the west? I mean, in effect, sort of taking off that really sharp point, having a more, not rounded roof or a kind of a roof that looks something like that, whatever that shape is.
Sort of a modified A-frame or something.
Well, yeah, well, kind of up, kind of. There's just not a sharp angle. I'm not sure what difference that would make light-wise. I'm not sure it would make any difference given the fact that the house is so close, but just something to throw out far as a slightly different roof that still allowed for a loft in effect, but no, it just didn't have that sharp peak. Not sure we're talking about 3 feet, 2 feet, or what we're talking about up there.
Through the chair, it does seem to me that it would change the angle at which the sun would break through, unless the sun had to come all the way down the western face in order to make any contact with the adjacent house, in which case it wouldn't make much difference. So that's a geometry question.
Just throwing it out. Joe.
Through the chair, we did want to make sure that everyone noticed that Chair Hernandez, who could not be here tonight, did take the time to provide comments on both of these study session items. You have a hard copy of this before you. It's on the second side for the Myrtle proposal. And I think the comments are helpful in that staff is really trying to explore some of the questions about massing, the setbacks. We've heard a comment about a front yard setback. We've heard comments about the west side yard setback. We know that they're requesting a variance to the corner side of the street side on Second. So there's quite a few questions about every side of the house, and Chair Hernandez is asking about if the project is too close to the house next door. He notes it appears out of proportion. Is it possible for us to modify the setback from the street? It might make the house fit in better if we do not require sidewalks and allow landscaping or yard extend into the city right-of-way. I would be interested to see if there's some creativity there. I would consider adding a deck over the parking area. Let's see, looking for a view. The design is simple and fits into the neighborhood. So looks like he's emphasizing the frontage treatment and how the house is feeling relative to both the east and the west side of the property.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners?
I should just comment on what I heard from Rick. I appreciate some of the notions here, but this is a fairly busy area for pedestrian traffic. I'd be anxious about the loss of a sidewalk, and unless there was somehow adequate space, if there could be a narrower sidewalk that would satisfy city building standards for safety, I'd worry a little bit about people traveling right in the street in that area. So if that was something that the city had room to do, I'd certainly want to get clarity that we weren't putting safety at risk there, because that should be, if we can't do safety right, then we're not doing our job right. I think that the deck over the parking area has the same kind of light impact issues that the larger story does. If I understand his idea to be a raised deck that would be up at loft level, I'd be concerned about that. Maybe some kind of patio in that area is feasible, but so other than that, I thought his comments were interesting. And I do want to say I appreciate that there is, not all homes have to be the same. When substandard lots became a subject for conversation at the city maybe 15 years or so ago, back when I was in my first round on the Planning Commission, we had a conversation about how to scale development down to fit the lot, because sometimes you have to do that. And I think there's a real bona fide effort to try to achieve that goal here. I do worry about the proximity to the impacts to the house immediately to the west, and hope that we can find a way to further mitigate those as part of the design process. Thanks.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Commissioner Benjamin's questions or comments regarding the sidewalk pedestrian safety. And I guess in full disclosure, I live on Myrtle, not too far from this house, so I drive by it daily. And so very familiar with the sort of pedestrian atmosphere here.
More than 500 feet away.
More than 500 feet away, yes. We did look into that. But I'm also familiar with with the sidewalk condition on that street, or the lack of sidewalks on that street. So how would that be handled in terms of there are no sidewalks on Myrtle.
There's some sidewalk behind to the south.
Yes, on Second.
One of the, I read Chair Hernandez's comment on this a little bit differently because I've had my head in the bicycle pedestrian master plan and the guidelines to it. And, you know, there's a number of different approaches to having a walkway or a pathway that are not poured concrete curb gutter sidewalk. So like a DG or a softscape kind of approach. And my understanding of his comment was more about making it feel like there's more room. And it could be possible to have a different kind of material that would look more like a garden element almost, and more like a piece of the yard. That's how I read the comment. I don't know if that's what he meant, but that's what I visualized when I read that.
Through the chair, I'm open to that.
Commissioner Evans, did you have one?
Right, some comment, yeah, some suggestions and comments. Appreciate the complexity of the property you're dealing with here. Let me just sort of, in my mind, address, the city has an ordinance for daylight planes that helps protect the different properties from blocking sunlight and things like that. And on the east and west side of this property, this fits all those daylight plane requirements. So I don't see the point in trying to argue something that aren't the facts of that. With the sidewalks, we have already looked at other projects where there's a new development is going to require sidewalks, and I would suggest that we might want to consider that we can do that but there are no sidewalks up and down 2nd Street or Myrtle Street except for the house to the south. And so maybe we impose that they, at some point, have to participate in doing sidewalks or pathways or curbs or gutters. But I think the city, we're still in the process of figuring out how we want to do the streetscapes and all of these walkways. And so until that's resolved, it doesn't make sense to put in one more little chunk of a piece of sidewalk that's just sort of out of context. So we might want to consider that going forward. With regard to the house, the proportion is nice. Because there's a need for a variance of setbacks on the side yard to the street of 2nd Avenue, and there's already a whole line of houses going west on Myrtle Street. I don't see why this couldn't be more towards Myrtle Street and be in context with the neighborhood of the location of the house. Because if you met all of our requirements of setbacks, you'd have a 5-foot wide house. So there's exceptions that need to happen here anyway, and space is a challenge for this property for anybody living there. And similarly, having 2 bathrooms is pretty luxurious for such a small house. So that may not be the right marketing approach, and that may not fit the business plan to build a house with only 1 bathroom. We raised our 2 girls in a house with 1 bathroom, and boy, there's a closeness in that family that happens. It's not. It's just an observation. It's not. But specifically with the roof line on the house, and also with the what is called a bay window here in the kitchen, I would suggest, since we're getting relief from ordinances anyway, that you might want to make that little bay window a little bit deeper. It's only a foot deep now, and that's not very convenient to sit in. And so it could be a wonderful little sitting place that makes that kitchen area very nice. And if it's 2 feet deep instead of 1 feet deep, what's the difference? It's such a small portion of that whole part of the property line, and it gives a texture, and it isn't going to make any difference in terms of trying to crowd the street any more than it already is. And along those lines, there's a suggestion of maybe the roof pitch might be a little different in that area to make a little more light in that kitchen area, as well as adding a couple of skylights on the west side. that would really enhance the brightness of that space. So to those ends, I did a very quick sketch, and I don't want to take our public's time to sit up at the chalkboard and draw this again for you, so you're welcome to have this sketch and take that into consideration of those ideas. So specifically with the roof pitch that has that little cut-off piece, might just want to make that a gable end and put a little different shaped window in there just to make it a simpler design. It's kind of a cute little cottage, and we've got uncute cottages and other kinds of different buildings here, and so the variety, I think, is a nice addition, and depending on the detailing of how you put it together, it could work. But we might want to consider just even the location on the property of
Yeah, so I heard you say in your first set of comments that the context of the street was when the front yard setback was 20 feet, and that you would entertain the building being closer to Myrtle.
What's the suggestion? I don't
Okay.
know that my commissioners agree with
No,
me.
I understand,
And,
but
the part of the house that's next to this one next door is a garage. The other part of the house is set back a little further. Is it?
I think that's right.
Nice. Those are my suggestions, and that's. Yep.
I guess this is a study session, so our goal here is to maybe give advice what to do or what not to do when they come back, as opposed to coming back and say, well, this is what I heard, and
I don't know how to
when we say
circulate
no. Just trying to get
You guys wanna-
context here. Is there anything that Jimmy, John, Brian have seen here that would be absolutely no? Not? I'm just trying to give advice so that when we see this coming back, all of a sudden it's brand new and so on like that. So I'm just curious. I haven't heard anything that was, well, absolutely not. But I just want to make sure that we're giving advice in a way when this comes back. You want to come back 3 or 4 times after that. So that's all I'm asking among our fellow commissioners.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Any advice they want to give the applicant here?
So, so I'll just, I'll say that the loft concerns me. I'm not a building code expert, and I don't pretend to understand that. I appreciate that this satisfies our light planes. The fact that it has to be so close to, the adjacent home in order to be of adequate width suggests to me that satisfying those light planes could easily be, it needs to be understood in the context of a home that would require a setback that is much smaller than what we're used to. So I don't read the light plane standards in isolation, and I'm sure that John doesn't either.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The daylight plane says that starting at the property line, you go up 10 feet, and then in at 45 degrees.
Right.
And so it has nothing to do with what the side yard setback is.
I think with respect, I think from the experience of that is what the ordinance says, I agree. From the perspective, or the standard, from the perspective of the landowners, they're going to experience the consequences of how that plays out in a way that's different when the home is so close. That was my concern. But I appreciated the comment about having a setback that would be more consistent with the Myrtle Street setbacks that you raised. I thought that was a really interesting idea. Haven't really thought through the bay window issue. In general, we try not to make variances, and we try to minimize, as a matter of law, what we have to do to make a place available for enjoyment. But perhaps this is so small a change that it's not a big deal either way. So, I wouldn't say that if all of these suggestions go, that nothing will pop up. But it's a pretty amiable discussion. I think we've tried to address some of the neighbors' concerns and tried to understand the needs, the challenges of building on a lot like this. So I hope we don't sound too Solomonic about this. But that's my 2 cents. Is that cleared up for you, Les?
And just Scott, for clarity, is on the setback overhang requirements, dormers, things like that, it has to do with the percentage of the width of the property line that you can have these dormers and roof overhangs impinging in setbacks, right? And I don't think you need to answer that right now. I think in context with the applicant, I think we're not going to be doing any sort of exceptional kind of things when you're adding a texture like that. That's already going into a variance that's starting to happen anyway. That's a good point.
Very good. Seeing no other comments, I suggest we move on to the next study session. Thank you for coming.
Scott gets a moment to make a costume change, and he'll be ready to go.
Okay, so this is the next study session of the evening, and it includes a project that the Planning Commission has seen in the past, but it's a duplex on the corner of Poplar Street and Cabrillo Highway, and this is an opportunity for the Planning Commission to provide feedback on the preliminary designs. We have two separate designs that we've included in your packet, and it's one of our, again, a unique site. Some of the concerns I want to touch upon that the Planning Commission brought up in the past on the previous design were, concerns about access and circulation, given the, the corner lot and the busy highway. Grading and drainage, that concern came up, as well as open space and landscaping. And keep in mind that what we provided to you thus far is two separate designs, but we will be requesting complete landscape plans, grading and drainage, and circulation plans that will be included, once this project comes back to the Planning Commission. Frontage improvements as well. So just as a refresher, this is the previous site plan that was included with the single-story design that the Planning Commission looked at previously. And what we tried to do here is indicate the in the red, or I guess it looks more purple on this board on the screen, but the driveway and the mouth of the driveway as it goes into Poplar. This slide indicates the basically the first option that includes the detached garage for one of the units. And notice that the driveway entry has been reduced, the sort of the mouth of the driveway along Poplar compared to the old design. The footprint of the duplex has also been pushed back, at least for the detached garage option, approximately 30 feet compared to the old design. So this site plan indicates the basically the second option that includes the tandem garage parking for the duplex, or tandem attached. Now the footprint is a little bit closer than the other one to Poplar, but as you can see, the actual surface area of the driveway is roughly half of the other option. So this slide indicates the floor plan for the detached garage option, And it includes, the second floor, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and then first floor, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, totaling a little over 2,700 square feet, including the garage. So fairly modest size duplex. And then this is the floor plan for, a little hard to see, but it's the tandem garage. And notice that there is a separation for the garage openings. 2-car tandem, and the ground floor unit does have a little bit more storage space. It's the smaller of the 2 units, more storage space in the garage itself. The second story does have this unique feature of a large balcony, open space, outdoor living area. So a little bit larger than the other option, a little over 2,900 square feet. Same bedrooms and same number of bedrooms and bathrooms. And here's a side-by-side comparison of the front elevation facing Poplar. You've got the detached garage option on the left, and then the tandem garage parking with the second-story balcony on the right. Proposed elevation that faces Cabrillo Highway. And you can really see the detached garage there, the 2-car garage, and then the second-story unit has the 2-car garage attached in the front. And then these are the side-by-side comparison of the proposed east elevations. And then the designer actually just this morning shared these renderings with us, and it gives you a comparison of the how the buildings would look on the corner. And so what he did is he just borrowed an old Street View image that, if you look close, it actually has the story poles from the previous design that shows the footprint quite a bit closer to Poplar. So this is the detached option, and then this is the tandem garage with the balcony on the second story. And similar to the last one, we encourage you to, the applicant and his designer is here. It's maybe suggest giving them an option to have a few words, take public comment, and be happy to answer any questions. And excited to get some feedback.
Great, thank you. Any questions of staff before I open up to the applicant? Okay. Please state your name and go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Brian Brinkman, working with the applicant, Paul McGregor. I was not a part of the original design that had, as Scott pointed out, some issues. One, they were asking for a variance for the parking, as they were proposing 2 single-car garages. And then, due to the single-story nature, it had a larger footprint, which greatly reduced the usable outdoor space that was available, which the driveway ate up a good chunk of. So he came to me with an idea for a 2-story project, which was suggested, I believe, in his the last planning commission meeting for that original first project. So the first design we came up with the detached garage, we still would have a driveway along the Highway 1 side to access that detached garage. Since it's pushed back a little with a smaller footprint, the other unit is able to have a garage that fronts Poplar. Also, with the smaller footprint, with the 2-story option, we're able to pull the buildings a little closer towards the highway and away from the neighbor, which provides better usable space rather than the 5-foot setback that the other project had proposed. That project there meets all the height, setbacks, daylight plane, meets everything. We submitted to the planning department. They did a preliminary review, and they still had concerns with the expanse of the driveway. So they proposed to us to come back with another option with utilizing tandem parking so that both garages, all the parking could be accessed directly from Poplar without having to navigate to another part of the property. So this proposal also meets all the height, setback, daylight plane. The only thing is we would need an exception for the tandem parking. So basically we're looking to get your feedback here tonight on these, the two different options we have in front of you. We've chosen materials that are durable and low maintenance since it's has a predominant western exposure. That'll help. And then we've also chosen colors that mimic a lot of the natural vegetation in the area with the earthy green and brown tones. Just going back to a couple of the other items that were on the original staff report of areas of concerns. There was a discussion of a potential sound wall along the highway there. We don't believe a fence is really going to do much in that way, but Paul did a project recently that was, again, about the same proximity to the highway, and in that one we used resilient channels in the walls and rock wool insulation to help minimize the sound impact. He used windows that were rated ST35 to help with that as well. And then he also put acoustical drywall on all the walls facing the highway in that case, on the western. We would do that on the western side in this project. So in totality, I think we've addressed concerns that were proposed in the first, that were problematic in the first design, and we look forward to whatever feedback you might have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any initial questions of the applicant? Commissioner Benjamin?
Not of the applicant. Beg your pardon. I'll wait. Thank you.
So with that, we open up to public comment. I have one card. Joel Sofer.
Good evening again, members of the Planning Commission. Jules Sofer, 536 Poplar Street, and my house is catty corner to this one. And so what I've noticed since we got the stoplights is that especially during the commute times, the Poplar, the block that goes up to Main Street, and on ours down to the corner, which has a stop sign, people in cars, when they see a green light on Highway 1, they want to catch that green light, and they speed up quite a bit. They don't go slowly. And that's something that I think that the Planning Commission needs to consider on this, as the driveway is coming out right there on the corner. Those cars go pretty fast. Now, the city is going to be doing something in the next year, as I understand, about sidewalks, curbs, gutters, or not curbs, gutters, just sidewalks, or walking paths or something, all up and down Poplar. And you might keep that in mind when you're discussing this, because I'm just really raising the one point, and that is where the driveway comes out to Poplar. And I would hope that we're not creating an unsafe situation there. And as I say, remember, those cars, when they see a green light, they want to catch it. Thank you. I think that that's all I have to say. It's a very general statement, and that's enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Received an additional comment card for Carlos Ruiz.
There is one other thing that's a safety item there, and that is if in that driveway a vehicle is parked, it can cause visibility handicapping for people going very fast on Poplar and also on Highway 1.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carlos Ruiz. I'm on 575 Poplar Street, which is the east side property adjacent to it. I think this picture here is being a little bit generous in terms of what the actual property line is, because it's on my garage. So
Just gonna say.
so there's about 5 or 6 feet there that aren't part of the property, which sort of visually impacts what the neighbor across the street was mentioning in terms of the access to that property. So, I mean, there's a couple of items that have been addressed by me before on the initial plan that was laid out, and I don't think those issues have been sort of resolved or addressed. So one of the things that was asked last time was a Caltrans study on this property and how it affects traffic. That hasn't been done. The city engineer also was asked to be involved in this. For me to turn, or anybody in our house to turn into our driveway, is impossible coming from Highway 1 to turn in there because of the number of cars. I mean, there are times that I'm trying to turn in and they're past 4th Street, so I have no access. I have to go to Main Street, make a loop around in order to get to my house. So if someone is going to make a shorter turn to access that lot, it's impossible. I've sent a number of letters to the city to see if I can get a keep clear so I can enter my driveway from Poplar Street, but hasn't been addressed. So that is a concern that hasn't been addressed. One of the things that also hasn't really been addressed is we have those crosswalks. As you can see, they sort of dead end to that area. So there isn't anything taking you on to Poplar Street itself from that point. So you cross, then you're on that side. There's nothing really that takes you back. I did hear on December of 2016 that basically the applicant should consider either a 2-story or a single-story dwelling. I don't think that was taken into account either. This single story. The drainage, I mean, there are some surveyors' notes in terms of elevations on the current plans, and I mean the current plans don't show elevations of the new building, so I will still be basically submerged between two sides if they're going to be higher than where I'm at. I think that's my concerns right now.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any additional public comments? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. Questions, comments? Commissioner Benjamin.
So I appreciate the comments of the neighbors, the applicant, and the applicant's representative. I share your experience at being new to this. I was not part of the planning commission that rejected this project or without prejudice back in 2016. And I was just noticing that the size of the structure that was considered in the December 2016 was about a total of 3,300 square feet spread across one story. This one is 3,713 square feet, and I just wonder whether the commission gave any advice, with respect to massing and the change in size, because there's clearly a massing impact associated with the second story in this project. So a little history would be good for me.
I do not have that history. Commissioner Dumont or Commissioner Evans.
Right, maybe our seniors could advise us.
And just to clarify, so the plans indicate two different options. One with a total floor area of 2,710 square feet. So that's for the detached garage option, which includes the garage.
You know what? I'm all wet. I was looking at the impervious surface number.
And then
I have answered my own question with your astonishment at my question, so thank you for that. With your permission, I'll go ahead with comments on the design. So first, with respect to the change from one story to two story, I did not hear, I gather, since I wasn't here during your earlier presentation, I gather one of your concerns was that you would feel sandwiched by a tall structure. Sorry, you can't speak at this point. The hearing is closed, but but that was my understanding, and I can appreciate his concerns about that. When I looked up and down Highway 1, which of course Highway 1 is a scenic corridor for, it has significant visual resource value. I noticed that most of the structures were one story in that area. Further south on the east side, there was a two-story structure, but it's rather further set back from Highway 1, or at least what I perceive to be the Highway 1 right-of-way. So I'm interested in my colleagues' feeling about having a two-story structure at this location. If there were going to be a two-story structure, the massing associated with the detached garage option appealed to me somewhat more because it wasn't quite as bulky, and I like the idea of breaking out large, bulky structures. I appreciated the comments from the applicant with respect to noise. I'd like to extend the thinking to vibration as well. A sound wall wouldn't have much of an impact unless it were a very tall sound wall on noise, and this area does get a lot of heavy traffic. So getting clarity on how we would deal with noise and vibration in the second level is going to be, of course there are building standards that I'm sure the staff would require us to meet, and then there's a question of what we as a community think is a reasonable level of impact that we should permit both within our interior living spaces and in the exterior spaces. Since one of the points of the tandem design that staff suggested as an alternative would be to replace that impervious driveway space with something that would be somewhat more accessible for living in, presumably soft grass space or plants or something like that. It would be a shame if that area were noisy and vibrating in a way that made it inhospitable for development. I'm not suggesting that that's inherent in the design, but I just would like to have a better understanding of how that might work. Let's talk about lot drainage for a moment. I noticed that the lot had a fairly steep slope downward as you go north into what looked like a culvert. I didn't go down into the property because the vegetation is pretty high, and I've had my quota of ticks for the week. You know, I can imagine that area getting an awful lot of water draining off into that culvert, and it would be interesting to understand how we might be able to do intelligent water retention in a world where we're paying more attention to water. It seems like there should be an opportunity to retain water and reuse it for non-potable uses on the site. You know, I defer to you guys. I'm not a botanist, but I noticed there was a large reed that appears to be creating a privacy barrier between this lot and the lot further to the north. And I don't know, like I said, I'm not a botanist, but I know that there is a giant reed that is an invasive exotic. The state beaches had some of that near Sweetwood, and they have gone to great lengths to try to eradicate it. So if this is that plant, I'd certainly like to see the invasive exotics or non-natives replaced with natives that are drought tolerant, but still provide some of those screening benefits. I welcome the proposal for solar. I thought that was really wonderful, and I hope that they'll follow through with that and do more to evolve it in that way. Those were my high-level comments. I thought that the comments from the public let the record show that Jules used to sit on the city's architectural review committee many years ago, so he brings a certain expertise, which I appreciate. And the speaker from the public both expressed really legitimate circulation concerns, and we need to pay careful attention to how the landscaping and the potential for parking of vehicles would impact visibility at that intersection. As people try to get out, they might not have visibility of the crosswalks if they're in a hurry. Maybe there are creative approaches that would set the stoplight back further that would provide a better margin of safety in that area. I'm not the traffic engineer, so I'd certainly like to understand that better. I very frequently see landscaping that gets high or cars that are parked that pose real risks to pedestrians, cyclists, and other vehicles that don't realize that they are not being seen by cars screaming down the street to try to beat a light. So thank you for that insight.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Commissioner Dimon, Commissioner Evans. Commissioner Dimon.
I think I, too, like the second garage. I have an issue just visually with a tandem garage. In fact, looking at that from a safety standpoint, it seems to me that I think I'd like to ensure one way or the other that anybody that parks in either of the two garage can turn around so that when they go out, they're head first. Because going out tail first, I think is a really big safety problem. Well, or something that's pervious, But so I mean, to me, the tandem garage means that you've got two cars backing out. From a safety standpoint, I think that's an issue that I at least feel that would be negative to safety.
Les, can I horn in just to follow up? So looking at the two pictures, I wonder if there was any way that we could get the tandem garage design but have some kind of detachment or some other design that would reduce the bulking and still provide for room to, sort of do a Y turnout so they can do head out. It looks to me like the tandem garage design that's up on the board right now has that capacity, but it lacks the it lacks it has that bulking, the failure to break up the mass. I wonder if there's some design approach to creating at least the illusion, this is maybe a John Evans wizardry question, that would take the mass at the northern end of the parcel and somehow separate it a bit so that we get that, the breakup of mass benefit that we saw in the original design without losing the reduction of impervious layers. Just a brainstorm here.
I mean, I think from the standpoint of driveway, combination of driveways that are grass, stone, and so on. I mean, I don't like to see solid concrete, and I think there's some policies we have on that score too that we can, of course, insist that it's not just impervious concrete. But I'm trying to look at the driveway, so that it seems to me that with the current view, driveway that is going in the garage head first can kind of back out and perhaps turn so that when it comes out, it's head forward. Again, size-wise, I'm not sure, but at least that's my look. And also from the front, I think there's an option to kind of turn the back of the car towards Highway 1 and then turn so that the front's the other way too. Because I mean, I think if a car has to back out of that, it's a real safety hazard. And I think some of the other issues that were raised, it seems to me that I'd sure like to see a design so that traffic engineering can ensure that either by putting a kind of a triangle so that people can walk. Well, there's a little triangle on Kelly, for example, when you cross there, so that there isn't as big as a safety issue as far as people crossing that one striped area. Yeah, little refuge area. Again, Kelly has one on the southeast side, for example, so that there's a bikeway and people can kind of cross before people turn into Kelly. Of course, this is going the other way there. So I think there's certainly some work to be done to kind of help us understand what the traffic safety issue would be on that. Otherwise, plan-wise.
Jill, did you have a comment on that point?
I'll let the commissioner wrap
Yeah,
up, but I
and-
do want to go through site circulation. Yep.
I mean, you know, this is also a difficult lot as far as drainage. I would certainly hope that the city, as its usual due diligence, ensures that any drainage plans are such that the neighbor to the east isn't impacted, and that you know, perhaps a swale or something, retention area, could help in that score. And I think those are things that we could kind of help the people in terms of when they come back, make sure that that's included in the plan. But again, I think my preference is the one with the separate garage, but that's just visual. That's all.
Right, sorry to interrupt you there, Jill.
I wanted to spend a moment, because we did not present the context of the street project that's coming down the pike, and then there's some details on both alternatives of the plan that we want to make sure you know that we did the math and checked the turning radiuses and all of that. So I'm going to pop up here because I think it's easier. So the city received a grant for a complete street study of Poplar from Main Street all the way down to the beach parking lot. And it's going to be a little while before we get going on planning that, but from the complete streets perspective, we believe there's really two distinct segments. This side, each side of Highway 1 having a different character. You'll note that there's no crosswalk on this side here. Best practices would have crosswalks on all 4 lengths of the intersection, and we also would expect changing the turning radius around a swooping curve like this. This is not what you'd want to be doing to set up space for crossing the street and having a nice, as you say, you cross the street and there's nowhere to be, I think the neighbor noted, and that is absolutely true. So you could imagine if you had a sidewalk or walkway or whatever the neighbors end up preferring, that some kind of a bulb out could really reclaim this corner and force a slower turn movement by a significant amount, and also essentially present almost an increase in frontage for this, even though it's right of way, but it would serve as almost a depth of frontage for that parcel. So there's actually room to pull out. Now, Scott, can you pop over to the site plan, the first one, the next one, that one. Okay, so this one that you're liking a bit more, we've checked all the turning radius, and you can back out and go out forward on both of these garages. And the next one. And you can do that here too. So we've checked all these measurements, and you can back out and go out forward. There's no way we would bring a plan to you if you had to back out of that property. So we did check that. I'm sorry we don't have frontage. Yep.
Two cars in there. Could you back one out, have it stop, and then put another one without blocking it? If they're in tandem. So let's say the car that's parked further north wants to get out. Is there room for the car that's on the south to pull out, and then for the second car to be able to come nose out too? I mean, I'm trying.
Yep. We were going to suggest widening a little bit over. I'm not tall enough.
Okay, all right, okay.
Of a pad, so that you could actually do that.
Okay.
I live in a house with a long driveway and that little do-si-do that you have to do. You've got to have room for it, so we get that. Yeah, so anyway, we wanted you to know that because it's hard to tell on these plans without seeing the turning radius and that work. And we did not bring you frontage improvements because that work hasn't started, but there's an intention to do that. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Commissioner Evans?
Had to kind of look a bunch of different directions here. I mean, you sit over there is awkward because we're so when we first saw this project, I recall, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. When we first saw the project, I recall that I think some of the consensus of the commission was that well, clearly this piece of property doesn't fit the zoning district that's imposed on it. The regulations of the R2 zoning district are meant for different shape and different access parcels. So it's already kind of strange to deal with. And so it seemed like the project you were trying to do, a 2-unit development, would need a bunch of exceptions. And so it seemed like from the project you presented, what we were talking about was, well, if you're going to be starting to ask for exceptions, why not do something really creative and come up with something that's really innovative and interesting, and that's not a particularly fair request to make, and so what I see now is what you've done is taken what the current regulations are, and other than ask for doing tandem parking, you're not asking for any exceptions at all. Right. I mean, but that's the basics of this. So I don't think I don't want to have this dialogue. I'm going to make critique and comment, and then we can figure out a different way to dialogue. Thank you. So, but I think that's the basics. And generally, the site slopes a couple of feet from southeast to northwest. And I agree with Commissioner Demand that somehow the drainage needs to be resolved, and I'm sure that they'll figure that out. And like you, I also made sure that there was this 25-foot backup requirement to get in and out of garages and that kind of stuff. In the solution where there's a detached garage, I still question that the fire department is going to allow, I haven't seen where they allow buildings closer than 5 feet. So, and I don't know that that's a question that needs to be answered, because I have other concerns about having a property that's this small, and we have a street that's Poplar, and we have Highway 1, and then we have a driveway, and so we have all this land given to cars, and then to extend more driveway and more parking, you know, it makes sort of just a kind of like a shopping center parking lot for cars and not much place for living. So with that respect, even though there's issues with tandem parking in more urban areas, which maybe an R2 district is or isn't urban, but it's certainly a more dense area than an R1 district, tandem parking is a way to keep all the cars closer to the street, just conceptually. And so, and then these separate sort of square rectangular shaped 2-car garages end up not being garages. They end up being junior second units or all kinds of other stuff, you know. Like my house, just, you know, load of clutter, and I don't have any place for the car at all, you know. So there's some advantages, I think, to the tandem parking, where you're kind of forced to put cars in there, and if you don't, then you have the same issues on any solution where you've got cars parked outside, and how do you get around them? And in the driveway configuration, that's the detached garage. If you go back to that one. I mean, we all have people that come as guests and park in front of the house or the garage. And I did a quick little study sketch, and if there are a visiting car that comes and parks in the west garage, parks in front of that garage, just, you know, then you block the cars getting out from the other garage. So there's sort of a internal management, CC&Rs, you know, kind of complication that's built in right from the beginning. It's hard for me to imagine that we can possibly approve any of these driveway designs without also seeing what the street improvements are. I just don't know how we would ever do it. Now, I don't know how that works logistically with the planning of the project, and I feel awkward about saying that, but I just don't see how, where you have, I mean, we just don't know. And so you're approving something that we don't have any idea of how the Poplar Street east of Highway 1 solves those problems. You beat me to the punch, and it's just fantastic about, I don't know why we don't have more teeth in our submittal requirements of what projects like this look like from the street, because the elevations don't tell us that. And so you did a great job of those two, we haven't seen them really yet, you just kind of flashed them up, of potentially what this project might look like. So that's a big help. Now, and we assume it's accurate and it's a good good representation of what this might look like. A technical question on the shapes of the upstairs that faces west. Is that a flat ceiling? Is it you thought of as a flat ceiling or a vaulted ceiling? And if it's not a vaulted ceiling, then if you have hip roofs, then it won't have quite the overall massing from Highway 1, if it was a hip roof on that west elevation. I think you're not quite finished resolving how you get the entrances, depending on which design this is, whether it's the tandem car or the detached garage, which I would encourage against the detached garage one. Both of those, the entrance points to the units are kind of cramped, and on the both the tandem car parking and the separate garages, you have an area that's only about 4 feet square, where you have a door from a garage and an entrance door, and then when you get to the top of the stairs, there's a door there, and I guess I didn't do my homework. What's the required setback on the east side of this property? Is it 10 feet?
On the east side, it's 5.
Right. So there's a lot of space there where you could do a little bit more with those entrances to make them just a little bigger. So when someone comes in, they're not having to open 2 doors in the same space. And if they're carrying their groceries or a piano upstairs or something like that, there's some space to do that. With the look of the building, so my general note on that is, generally the exterior detailing and roof lines are a little awkward for this shape of a building. I'm not critiquing the mass of the building. I think it fits all our regulations. It's the mass that it's going to be to impose this particular style, I'll think specifically if we go 1 block to the north, which right now my brain cells are almost completely gone. So the next street to the north of Poplar is Filbert. So the house on the northwest corner of Filbert and Highway 1 is a very good example of another vernacular of materials and shapes that's still kind of, traditionally what a kind of California house is. And you might want to consider that look. It's a steel roof. It's,
You're talking about on the west side of Highway.
I'm sorry. Yeah, north. Yeah, northwest corner. Yeah, it's a different size property, but generally speaking, it's surprisingly it's very different than the buildings around it, but blends in just fine. And especially traveling north-south on Highway 1, and so. That's the basics.
Very good. Thank you very much. So a lot of.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me.
Go ahead.
So on the survey's great. It shows all the information. It does not show the height of the center line of Highway 1. So because I think it's 3 to 5 feet higher than the property elevation itself, and that affects pretty dramatically how the house looks, and it might be even in the favor of the building itself. Yeah. Okay. And that's my comments.
Great. Very good. Thank you very much. I would concur with Commissioner Evans in favoring the tandem parking there, and also like the suggestion of looking at the materials and the design of the place at Filbert first. I generally support having the less impervious surface, more open space opportunities for more stormwater catchment, rain gardens, those types of things. So beyond that, I think would definitely concur with the need to see some of the street side improvements and understanding how this would fit in with those improvements that we have discussed previously, or that Jill had mentioned in terms of being planned. Beyond that, that's the gist of my comments. Commissioner Hernandez did submit additional comments, so do want to go through those. He did state that the applicants addressed many of his concerns raised during the previous hearing, and reiterated the need for that street access is safe for cars and pedestrians and doesn't affect circulation. He suggested on the first floor, consider flipping the layout of the kitchen and the dining room area. If the residents use the garage for parking, having the kitchen closer to the garage will make it easier to bring food and whatnot into the house. Made a suggestion for additional skylights, potential for a deck for the second-story unit, a suggestion to see more variation on the western exposure of the house. We've discussed, and he reiterated, the width of the driveway and sufficient space to turn around. Also requesting see and design for sidewalk and protected path for pedestrians. He does state he does not believe the two-structure design is submitted as workable on the lot. And that's the gist of his comments. So, so with that, any other, Commissioner Benjamin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that based on Commissioner Evans' sage perspective, I'm persuaded to support the tandem way of thinking about this, so I appreciate your careful consideration. I do hope, notwithstanding your lack of concern about massing, that the design can give some additional attention to the bulk that people passing by on Highway 1 are going to experience as they go past this. Maybe the narrowing of that swoosh intersection that Jill was talking about might move traffic away from it. But you know, the one aspect of the detached design that drew me in was the idea that we had, and I think Commissioner Damon might have felt similarly, was this idea of a somewhat smaller net effect. And I appreciate that this is aesthetics, and I generally defer to a professional like you in these matters, but this is just my strong personal preference to find some way to reduce the appearance of the massing if we can. Thank you.
So I guess whereas the first plan really didn't require a variance, the second one would because of what the tandem garage, does that require a variance? Anything else on that one require a variance?
No, but, you know, I want to hark back to the Planning Commission's review of the original plan in 2016, and Commissioner Evans' comment was in the minutes, and it was included in your staff report, that to encourage really making use of some creativity and the kinds of allowances that could be afforded an unusual site like this. So I know the applicant has tried really hard to not need a lot of exceptions. In this particular version of the plan, the tandem garage, we would have encouraged the building to be pushed back to the north, and there's probably a little bit of work that could have been done on the massing. So that's what I'm getting out of this, that I'm hoping the applicant feels more comfortable about it. It's very hard to be an applicant needing an exception, and so I'm trying to reassure that meeting the design drivers and responding to your comments, whether you need an exception or not, is really the priority.
Right, and I was just commenting on my observation of what was submitted to us. On my site plan, there's a big arrow saying, you know, shove the building that way, you know. But I'm not suggesting, and also I overlooked the deck over the garage that's south off the bedroom. I know you're aware of all the technical problems of all the waterproofing that has to be dealt with. And I have a client right now that's bought a house that's kind of a long and skinny house, and is just complaining like mad because the kitchen's in the front and the backyard's in the back, and you have to go through a bedroom to get to the backyard, so it's basically unusable. And so I think Commissioner Hernandez made a comment about that as well, that I'm not sure how usable there may be even a better use for an exterior deck if it's off the living space. And how you rearrange that is a different issue. But so I don't want to have the dialogue like that. So so not giving you the solution, but just saying it's a question we all know, that you know, the great deck off the bedroom is only sort of great in this circumstance. So, but thank you, Jill, for reminding me about that, because now I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the other planning commissioners, but I would be very interested in something that's functionally works for the building, works for the people living in the building, and if we have to make a few adjustments on such a quirky lot, now I'm not going to back off on the driveway with access to the street and the safety, but makes total sense to me. But I'm not speaking for them, and I don't know.
With that, are there any other additional comments from the commission? Yeah, it looks like you had additional comments. We can open that up real quick.
Yeah, so, you know, based upon the previous designs that we've gone through, my preference was the original design. I asked for a couple of variances. There was a lot more parking. It was single story. It was down low. I like that, but obviously it didn't meet everybody's concerns, all right? So with that being said, we've given you two options to look at tonight, and this is based upon feedback from the commissioners that were previous and so forth. So we came up with these designs. So the first design with the detached garage option requires no variance. It adds driveway, which I think was a concern for a lot of people, and there was drainage issues. The drainage, you know, that can be dealt with, and it already is dealt with because there is drainage shown on the plans. There's retention and so forth, and downspouts tie into that, and you guys are familiar with that, I'm sure you are, how drainage works. I do pick up the neighbor's drainage at the same time because the way this lot sits, his property flows towards my property, which flows towards Highway 1, and there is a natural drainage going north in that location. So to me, drainage is not an issue, but I have professionals that can deal with that at the same time. The other issue I look at is that preferably, you know, I would like to keep this as something for my retirement. This is something I want to keep. And it's very important for me to have people that are going to live in one of my buildings, that they're going to get out and in safely, and I definitely want them to drive out onto Poplar and not back out, such as all the other homes and units on Poplar as it sits right now. Everybody backs out. The neighbor backs out. There was a tandem parking house down the street on the right-hand side, on the south side, that was approved, that backs out onto the roadway. That's a concern for me. I don't want people to get hurt leaving my premises. You know, what I'm looking for right now is guidance. That's why we call this a study session. So I hear some people like the tandem option, others like the other option, the original option that doesn't require variance. So we're looking to see what you want, and that's why we're here tonight. As far as a mass on the front, on the detached garage option, you know, for me, I'd like to see like a covered porch on the lower unit right there. Maybe a gable that comes out, projects out a little farther, you know, to give it a little more interest to it. I like the idea of the deck on the tandem option. It's nice to be able to go outside sometimes, out of your unit, and sit outside and get some air and listen to the highway for all the cars and the police go by. So, you know, it depends on where you want to live. Everybody lives in different locations. You all have concerns, and I'm here to address those concerns tonight, and I hope we put on a good presentation. And any other questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, very good. So with that, seeing no more comments or questions from the commissioners, we can wrap up that item. And do you...
Oh, one last comment. Oh, so when I brought in the original detached garage option, there were some concerns by planning that, you know, the mass of the driveway and pervious surface and so forth was a problem. So that's where the tandem parking came in. I prefer option number 1, or the original plan, versus the tandem parking. That's my preference. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to Planning Commission Local Coastal Plan Update Subcommittee. All right.
The agenda item practically speaks for itself. We are revisiting a topic that you considered in April 2017 at your retreat, and then at a subsequent meeting, you've had some discussion about how to proceed with a review of the local coastal program. At that time, you were not interested. The commission wasn't thinking that a subcommittee was necessary, and we were bringing portions of the plan forward to you and moving along with you as a group, and that was working out. We are now working very hard on the most challenging pieces of the plan, specifically the development chapter and the public works chapters, and biological resources is coming forward as well. And definitely our city council is very interested in having our timeline chug along, and I could not be feeling more pressure than I am, so don't worry about applying anymore. It's all there. But they suggested, well, what about the Planning Commission having a subcommittee? And we said, yeah, let's go back to that idea. Staff would like you to do this now because we think it would be really helpful at this juncture in the project. If you don't want to do it, it is perfectly fine. We will soldier on, but we wanted to bring it as an agenda item for you to have some time to talk about it. Thank you.
Very good. I don't see any members of the public ready to speak on this, so bring it to the commission. Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. So when we had our original planning meeting to talk about what we wanted to try to do in 2018, this was an idea that I championed. I still think it's a good idea. And it, the update of the LCP is the primary reason that I accepted an appointment to the Planning Commission. It's so vital. So if the commission decides they would like to proceed with a subcommittee, I would be proud to serve on that subcommittee.
Okay. Other comments from the commission?
Is one of the prime purposes of a subcommittee so it can meet more often, be more responsive to the timeline of what you're wanting to do?
Absolutely, and we can share some key policy sticking points that we're having and talk them out with a subcommittee. Really just have a little more depth on the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Commissioner Damon, any comments, questions?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I'm not going to volunteer.
I guess I would second that. So with that, I guess I've got nothing else in terms of discussion here. So I guess we could entertain a motion.
Did John have any comments on this?
No. Am I volunteering? No.
So in honor of, out of respect for Commissioner Hernandez, I move that we establish a Planning Commission subcommittee for the local coastal program update. I had originally hoped that Vice Chair Holt would be interested, but it sounds like he isn't. Just to confirm that, would you, under duress, if your arm was being pressed to the back of your neck, would you consider participating?
Well, I'm always willing to serve, but I would advocate for some diversity on the subcommittee. So I would. What are the sections again that we would be looking to review as part of the subcommittee?
The framework, development, public works, and natural resources.
Great. So yeah, I guess my comments there are, I guess myself, I have a background in natural resources, open space, that sort of thing. Jimmy, I know that's that's a big interest of yours. So I would be concerned about having a subcommittee that is too heavily weighted towards that sort of expertise, and not necessarily having the balance of sort of the other side, to where then when items are coming back here, we sort of heavily dove into, you know, the natural resource questions and some of those other questions, and there might still be areas that aren't necessarily addressed. Is kind of my thinking. That's where I'm coming from.
So how would you feel about nominating a member of the commission who's not present? Let me put it out there.
Can I ask a question before?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Once we've established a subcommittee, there's 1 or 2 members of the planning commission, not 3, right?
That's right.
But there could be other members of the subcommittee. Would that be useful for your staff?
We would like to work with 2 planning commissioners with our consultants and staff in a real flexible manner. Yeah.
Other community members that would be, or is that not practical? I'm
It's not.
I'm not sure.
We've been working with stakeholders separately, and we've had numerous meetings with them, and we will continue to do that as issues come up. But we'd really like to work with a planning commission subcommittee to prepare the input that we've had from the General Plan Advisory Committee, as well as you, through various presentations, into a draft that you think represents the input that you've given.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I would sort of pile on that as well. As I have been involved in the General Plan Advisory Committee, have participated through that sort of process as well. So I do feel like I've had a lot of opportunity to give comments on sort of different angles on some of these things. But there again, I'd be, you know, if it seems as if it'd be valuable for me to be on there, certainly happy to.
Let me try a motion, and we'll see what happens. I move that we establish a 2-member subcommittee for the local coastal program update, consisting of Commissioner Hernandez and myself.
So we have a motion. Do we hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Even drafted.
Great, thank you. So with that, we can move into director's report.
So the first thing we're going to do is inform Chair Hernandez that he has joined a subcommittee. So the week has run away from me, and it's only Tuesday, and I have not prepared the typical level of detail in a report that I prefer to give you. So we'll just agenda highlight your next session will be study session on accessory dwelling units as well as short-term rentals. There is crossover of those 2 topics. We are going to have some kind of a e-news or some kind of big mailing out to make sure folks know about it. I get a lot of phone calls about both of those topics. I know staff does too. After that, we're still targeting March 27th for the notice of preparation for the Hyatt House proposal on South Main Street. And let's see, we've got Jenna Lane is coming back. And Pullman is actually, we were working on a grading and drainage plan, and I think we're making progress there. So we've got a couple things that we're hoping we'd like to clear the books on items that you continued, and we're really trying to get those 2 through. Anything else? Big items? Just to note, Joe Butcher is here tonight. Joe, can you wave? Bridget's planning to take some time off, believe it or not. So Joe is going to be helping us out. Joe's going to be hanging out with us quite a bit, learning the ropes, and we appreciate having him here. And also just note, I think some of you may have met Doug Garrison, but Doug Garrison is here tonight. He's our new senior planner, so if you have not met Doug yet, you may do so. And that's all staff has. Thank you.
Great, very good with that. Are there any planning commission communications?
To the Chair. I think both of us attended the Smart Growth Workshop in the city. It was a very interesting set of sessions. One of the things that came out of it for me was what has been referred to as the one water concept. Maybe you're already familiar with that, but the idea that we have to think about potable water and recycled water, wastewater, storm water, groundwater in a unified fashion if we expect to manage it properly. And I hope that some ideas will come forward to help us do a better job of that, because we're clearly fractured in our planning processes. Jill was also there, and it was a really great event. I hope that you can go to one of those at a future time.
Okay. Any other planning commission communications? Seeing none, we can adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.